World of Warfare presents the Allied Invasion of Sicily. As the Second World War moved into its fifth year of conflict, Adolf Hitler's assured vision of military supremacy had faltered badly over the past 7 months. The defeat at Stalingrad in February of 1943 had cost the Nazis dearly, and after British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had made the defeat of the German U-boat menace a priority at their Casablanca Conference in January of that same year, by July, the Battle of the Atlantic had been tamed after German Kriegsmarine commander Admiral Karl Donitz had no choice but to order a U-boat withdrawal from the main convoy routes in the North Atlantic due to heavy U-boat losses caused by the Allies' development of effective anti-sub destruction techniques. To further the winnowing of German morale and confidence, on May 13th, the Allies claimed total victory in their North Africa campaign when 250,000 German and Italian soldiers in Tunisia passed into Allied captivity. That same month, Churchill, Roosevelt, and their military planning staffs met in Washington, D.C. at a conference codenamed Trident. For their part, the Americans wanted to invade northern France to secure a rapid end to the war, yet the British feared a bloodbath worse than the trenches of World War I, instead lobbying for an attack on Italian dictator Benito Mussolini's fascist regime, thereby ensuring that Italian Axis forces would be eliminated prior to the D-Day invasion of Normandy under Operation Overlord. Given its size and location, as well as more than 30 airfields dotting the island, Allied war planners deemed Sicily to be a massive threat to air and sea routes within the Mediterranean theater of operations. But should Allied forces successfully secure the island from the Nazis, Sicily would make for a powerful airbase and jumping-off point for an invasion of mainland Italy, thereby reducing pressure on Soviet forces on the Eastern Front by diverting Axis troops into Italy for the defense of Germany's dwindling foothold in southern Europe. After the decision was made to invade Sicily and Italy before implementing the D-Day invasions of northern France, still more than a year away, the Allies were about to embark upon one of the most contentious chapters of World War II, the Italian campaign. And while the campaign would witness some early successes, the Italian campaign would prove to be no easy victory, with some of the fiercest battles of the war occurring at places like Salerno, Anzio, and Monte Cassino, making the invasion of Sicily a vital stepping stone in the Allies' push for Rome. Thanks to an elaborately executed ruse by Allied intelligence, Hitler and his German high command based their decisions gleaned from top-secret documents found on a Royal Marine officer whose body had washed up on a beach in southern Spain, under the false belief that the Marine had drowned in an aircraft crash in April of 1943. When copies of the original documents reached German intelligence by a pro-Nazi Spanish naval officer, the false Allied invasion plan indicated that Sardinia and Greece would be the true points of invasion. While the deceased Royal Marine had actually died of pneumonia back in Britain, Hitler accepted the ruse as gospel, moving a substantial number of motorized infantry divisions into Sardinia and a panzer division into Greece, followed by 2 paratroop divisions into southern France, giving the Allies' eventual invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, a nearly 2-to-1 advantage over the remaining Axis forces left on Sicily. Beginning on the morning of July the 5th, 5 invasion fleets under the command of Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham closed in on Sicily from opposite ends of the Mediterranean, comprised of the Eastern Task Force under British Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay, made up of some 1,700 warships, troop transports, and landing craft, which in turn carried 4 British and Canadian divisions under the command of General Sir Bernard Montgomery, with plans to land near Syracuse. The Western Task Force under U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Kent Hewitt, comprised an equal number of ships and American infantry divisions led by Lieutenant General George S. Patton, with orders to land near Jala. In advance of the beachhead invasions, Allied war planners also called for paratroop and glider troop landings by the British Airborne and the U.S. 82nd Airborne Divisions well inland of the beachheads, intended to further destabilize German resistance on Sicily. As the July 10th invasion neared, Allied war planners drilled down on a final strategy for their push across the island, with Patton's 7th Army scheduled to land on a 40-mile front on the island's southern coast, while Montgomery's 8th Army would land on a 40-mile front on both sides of Sicily's southeastern corner. While Patton's original orders were to push across the island for Palermo on the northwestern coast, the overall commander, British General Harold Alexander, had little faith in the American soldiers. Accordingly, the plan was changed to one of a shadowing flanking maneuver for Montgomery's push north along the eastern half of Sicily, since British strategists feared that American troops lacked enough combat experience for such an audacious attack on Palermo, a move that enraged Blood and Guts Patton beyond the limits of his patience. Beginning several weeks before the actual land invasion of Sicily, the Allies engaged in a concerted aerial bombardment and strafing campaign on Axis air forces stationed on Sicily, winning a resounding air superiority by the time of the ground offensive. However, as paratroopers and glider-borne troops took to the skies prior to the beachhead landing force, weather conditions and inexperience ended with tragic consequences. The American pilots carrying paratroopers had little training in airdrops over land, while British glider pilots had no experience flying American Waco gliders. Strong winds and early releases by anxious towplane pilots saw more than 40 of the 150 gliders crash on landing, many in the ocean. Geoffrey Glassborough of the 2nd Battalion, South Staffordshire Regiment, was one such casualty on the first night of landings, where he wrote in his diary that the tail was twisted right around. We had gone straight into a brick wall and landed in an olive grove. I came off with a terrific bump on my head, dislocated thumb and finger, and left hand cut about a bit. Most of the men also had cuts, while 2 of them had their legs trapped between the handcart and rocks. As the invasion fleet closed in on Sicily on the afternoon of the 9th, stormy seas caused many men in the invasion fleet to suffer severe seasickness. As the storm mercifully abated after midnight on the 10th, Allied naval warships began a shattering bombardment of Sicily at 2:45 in the morning, followed by an initial land invasion shortly after sunrise, beginning an invasion of Sicily that saw more men landed on the island in the first 24 hours that would land on 5 Normandy beachheads in a comparable period of time on D-Day, almost a year later. As Monty's 8th Army came ashore, Italian defenders surrendered with very little resistance, since they had little affection for Mussolini's fascist regime and had no desire to see their homeland ravaged by war. Patton and the Americans at Jala, on the other hand, met with strong opposition, which slowed their progress for the remainder of the day. Ships near Jala faced off with constant air attacks from the few remaining Axis aircraft still on the island, and when Allied paratrooper reinforcements flew over Jala the following night, they were shot at by trigger-happy Allied anti-aircraft gunners, resulting in the worst American friendly fire incident of the war. On day 2, Italian Commander-in-Chief General Alfredo Guzzoni ordered his remaining troops to drive the invaders back into the sea, made worse for the besieged Americans when swarms of German and Italian aircraft stationed on the Italian mainland attacked frontline positions from the air. Fighting desperately to keep the enemy at bay, panzer tanks advanced to within 2,000 yards of the 7th Army's beachheads, which was finally broken up and pushed back by American ground and naval artillery. followed by a hastily assembled force of paratroopers and infantry who repelled a second German counterattack. By the morning of July the 12th, Patton's 7th Army had suffered 2,500 casualties during the bloodiest 24 hours during the entirety of the 38-day battle. After Allied forces began their push northwards toward Messina in an attempt to cut off Axis troops fleeing across the 2-mile-wide Strait of Messina for the Italian mainland, the Allies experienced stiff German resistance after elite paratroopers and panzer tanks were rushed in to block the Allied advance. The Sicilian topography was another factor in slowing Allied advances, including the semi-active volcano Mount Etna, which rose 10,000 feet above the plain of Catania. After Allied command redrew the boundary between the 8th and 7th Armies on July 13th, giving favor to Montgomery's troops to advance up Highway 124 around Mount Etna. The change of order caused a serious rift between the two high-profile and much-celebrated generals, while their differing approaches to warfare further put them at odds. Montgomery's approach was one of slow, methodical pragmatism, building up troop strength under principles of meticulous planning, all with the hope of minimizing casualties. Patton's approach, on the other hand, emphasized speed and a relentless, energetic advance that refused to stop no matter what the obstacle. Patton responded with fury due to his strong dislike of Monty, leading Patton to set his sights on the capture of Palermo's major port facility, which would allow him to secure his supply lines for a push east to Messina in advance of Monty's forces. Under Patton's aggressive leadership, Palermo fell on July 22nd, while 2 days later, the whole of western Sicily, along with 53,000 Italian soldiers, were now under control by Patton's 7th Army. Dictator of Italy since 1922, and once considered a god by the Italian public, Benito Mussolini, known affectionately as Il Duce, shared power with Italian monarch King Victor Emmanuel III, who had never liked Il Duce's alliance with Hitler, and when U.S. bombs killed and wounded hundreds of Italian civilians on a July 19th Allied raid on Rome, the mood in the city became openly hostile to the fascist regime. After Mussolini was summoned to Rome for a meeting with the Grand Council on July 24th, Il Duce was dismissed and later imprisoned by the king on the 25th, following a no-confidence vote by fascist leaders, further destabilizing Hitler's campaign in the east and on Sicily. After repeated postponements by a second offensive against the Red Army at Kursk due to his fears of a simultaneous Allied invasion of Sardinia and Greece, Hitler finally gave the go-ahead on July the 3rd. Codenamed Operation Citadel, German troops launched probing attacks on the Red Army's outer perimeter on July 4th, followed by a primary offensive on the 5th. But after 4 days, the attack stalled until the 12th, when history's largest tank battle to date occurred when the combatants met to fight it out at Prokhorovka, followed by a major infantry offensive by the Red Army. When Hitler reviewed Citadel's progress on the 13th, German casualties stood at an egregious 50,000 killed or wounded. Combined with the Allies' invasion of Sicily 3 days prior, Hitler ordered a full retreat from Kursk in an effort to focus his efforts on repelling the Allies from their foothold in mainland Europe. Events further spiraled out of control for the Führer after the first bombing of Hamburg and the simultaneous dismissal of Mussolini on July 24th, the first creating a firestorm that killed an estimated 30,000 men, women, and children, many refugees fleeing the advancing Red Army, while making more than 500,000 people homeless. Meanwhile, back on Sicily, German General Albert Kesselring took command of all Axis forces, including recent reinforcements from France, initiating a troop withdrawal and frontline consolidation at the Etna line, where he planned to hold the line as long as possible while his retreating forces could evacuate from Messina. The Allies, in turn, saw some of the bloodiest fighting of the campaign in the mountain towns of Troina, Centuripe and Adrano, in near roadless areas that were far harder to attack than to defend. Besides Axis high-ground artillery batteries, landmines, and summertime temperatures hovering at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, malaria and other infectious diseases affected over 10,000 Allied soldiers, each obstacle slowing and ultimately stalling the Allied advance for 2 weeks. During the Allies' stalled advance, Kesselring's evacuation of Sicily was in full swing, and while the Allies attempted multiple amphibious operations intended to outflank the retreating enemy, Axis forces escaped each trap by blowing up bridges, roads, and mountain passes in their wake. At the same time, Allied aircraft found it impossible to attack the retreating Axis forces, since German troops maintained some 230 anti-aircraft guns along the Strait of Messina, while Allied naval forces were reluctant to breach the narrow straits, made ever more treacherous by enemy coastal gun positions and strong currents, which ultimately allowed 120,000 enemy troops to withdraw to the Italian mainland, largely unharassed. Thanks to Patton's aggressive offensives by units of the 7th Army in the west, American troops entered Messina early on August the 17th, finding the northern gateway city to the Italian mainland largely deserted by Axis forces. Blood and guts had won his race with Montgomery, yet Patton's victory was hollow, since more than 120,000 Axis troops and their weapons of war had evacuated across the Strait of Messina, posing enormous future bloodshed for the Allies in the next phase of their Italian campaign. By the end of the 38-day invasion of Sicily, the Allies had proven victorious in all of their objectives, including the removal of all enemy aircraft from Sicily, while opening sea lanes in the Mediterranean. Mussolini had been successfully removed from power, and the Italian mainland lay just 2 miles across the Strait of Messina, while Hitler had called off the Eastern Front offensive at Kursk, taking pressure off the war-beleaguered Soviets. The Allies had also conducted the largest amphibious invasion of the war, with over 180,000 men, 4,000 aircraft, and more than 3,000 ships, all with casualties far less than expected by Allied war planners. By the end of the campaign, around 6,000 Allied troops had been killed, with 3 times as many wounded, while the Germans and Italians saw 9,000 fatalities, 45,000 wounded, and 125,000 mostly Italian troops captured, making Operation Husky the first major chapter in the Allies' Italian campaign.